You're about to hear something you were never meant to know, something sealed behind closed doors for 73 years, buried not because it was shameful, but because it revealed the one truth every powerful family in America feared: that control is always an illusion, and nothing corrupts faster than a secret forced into silence. Picture it: Alabama, 1851. A plantation lady, Katherine Hartley, wakes at 3 in the morning to a house so quiet it feels staged. The kind of quiet that warns you that reality has shifted while you slept. She rises barefoot, drawn by a feeling she can't name. Not fear, not suspicion. Something older. A whisper in her bones. A voice that says, asterisk, tonight, everything changes. Asterisk. She descends the stairs. The hall is drenched in moonlight, blue and metallic, stretching across the floor like a blade. And beneath that cold light, she hears it. 2 voices, low, urgent, intimate in a way no wife in her world could misunderstand. Voices that should have been separated by law, by custom, by the iron hierarchy of a plantation. Yet here they were, crossing boundaries that weren't supposed to bend. She doesn't freeze. She doesn't panic. She listens, because Katherine Hartley belonged to a class of Southern women trained to smile, obey, and suffer silently. But underneath the silk and etiquette lived something far more dangerous. A mind sharpened by deprivation, by restriction, by a lifetime of being told what she could not be. And in that moment, standing in her own hallway, she realizes the deepest humiliation isn't that her husband has betrayed her, but how he has betrayed her. And with whom? Behind that door, her husband, Thomas Hartley. And Jacob, the enslaved man he had raised in favor, protected, educated in secret, moved around the plantation with liberties no enslaved man should have possessed. A connection Katherine had sensed long before this night, though she could never prove it until now. She opens the door 6 inches. What she sees in that narrow wedge of lamplight isn't explicit. It doesn't need to be. She sees proximity, vulnerability, trust, a bond that should have been impossible between a master and the man he legally owned. And in that moment, Katherine understands something devastating. Power is only stable when shame stays hidden. Expose the shame, and you own the power. Tonight, she would take everything back. And she would do it with a precision no man on that plantation ever believed her capable of. By dawn, the house seemed unchanged. The sun poured gold across polished floors, glinting off chandeliers, turning the plantation into a picture of perfection. But Katherine Hartley knew better. She could feel it in her veins. The threads of power had shifted, invisibly, irreversibly. Nothing in the big house would ever be the same. Not the servants, not the overseers, not her husband, and certainly not Jacob. Katherine didn't scream. She didn't confront Thomas, at least not in the way a society might expect. Instead, she moved with the quiet inevitability of a storm. Every gesture, every step was calculated. This was a woman who understood that vengeance isn't passion. It's strategy. And in her world, the line between control and chaos was thinner than a plantation candle flame. The first lesson she understood and the first weapon she would wield was the absolute fragility of the law. Alabama, 1851. Men like Thomas were untouchable in public, untouchable in courts, untouchable in church. But the law didn't protect them from secrets. The law didn't stop whispers. And the law certainly didn't defend against a mind that had nothing left to lose. In the silence of the early morning, Katherine plotted not just punishment, but transformation. She began with observation. Every step Thomas took, every glance Jacob made, every servant who whispered in the quarters. It became data, patterns, a map of human behavior laid bare. She cataloged them in her mind, like a chess master seeing 3 moves ahead, imagining consequences her husband would never anticipate. What he saw as obedience, she saw as opportunity. What he called property, she saw as leverage. And in the quiet, she allowed herself a rare, almost imperceptible smile. The power of truth is devastating when wielded correctly. But there was more than strategy here. There was psychology. Katherine understood the mind of a man like Thomas Hartley. Pride, secrecy, denial, these weren't just traits, they were vulnerabilities. He had built his life on appearances. He had carefully curated respect. And yet, in one small moment of exposure, that entire structure was fragile like sugar glass. The shock of revelation could be used not only to punish, but to rewrite the hierarchy he thought unbreakable. And Jacob, she recognized something even more dangerous. A human being capable of both submission and resistance, shaped by oppression yet capable of extraordinary subtlety. To move him, to manipulate the situation fully, she would need to think in layers, balancing fear and curiosity, cruelty and promise. By midday, Katherine Hartley had made her decision. Not a single word was spoken. Not yet. But the plan was clear. Power would be reclaimed, authority inverted, and secrets weaponized. The plantation, with all its wealth and tradition, would bend not because she demanded it, but because she understood the hidden, invisible codes that governed every soul within its walls. And here, my listener, is where you must pause and consider. The deepest truths of control are never written in law. They are written in fear, obedience, and the precise timing of revelation. If you understand this, comment below twice. The eye sees all. Twice. Commit it. Let the words anchor you. Because once you step into this story, the rules you thought governed power no longer apply. Evening fell across Hartley Plantation like a shadow crawling up a mansion wall. The sun's last rays flickered across the white columns, gilding them in the illusion of serenity. But Katherine Hartley had long learned that appearances are the greatest currency of power, and tonight, appearances would be her weapon. She moved through the house with the quiet authority of someone who knew secrets the world could never survive hearing. Thomas remained oblivious. He worked at his desk, unaware that every moment he lingered in complacency was another thread in the trap Katherine had begun to weave. Pride is a dangerous thing in men who believe themselves untouchable. Katherine understood that better than anyone. Men like Thomas, successful, respected, secure, never imagined that a woman could dismantle their empire with nothing but observation, patience, and calculated revelation. Her first act was subtle. Small omissions, rearranged schedules, whispered instructions to the household staff disguised as routine. Each move tested obedience, loyalty, and perception. The plantation itself became a living instrument of psychological pressure. Katherine knew that control doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, corrodes, and waits until the moment the mind breaks. And she had waited 9 years for this. 9 years of studying her husband, the enslaved workers, the rhythms of cotton and commerce, and the unspoken rules that governed their lives. Jacob's presence was the most delicate thread. Katherine observed him carefully, noting the subtle glances, the slight hesitations, the tiny acts of quiet defiance. He was intelligent, perceptive, resilient, and dangerously aware of the limits of his survival. To manipulate such a mind required a balance of threat and opportunity, fear and subtle promise. She had learned that oppression creates not just obedience, but cunning. And she intended to meet cunning with strategy, patience, and ruthlessness. That night, Katherine made her move. Not with violence, not with spectacle, but with the precision of someone who understood the alchemy of shame and secrecy. The two men who believed themselves above consequence had underestimated her. The mistress of the house, the observer of every rule, the silent calculator, had finally chosen the moment to act. She would reclaim power not by brute force, but by weaponizing the one thing Thomas and Jacob could never escape: truth. In the quiet of the candlelit library, Katherine realized the essential law of human hierarchy. Fear is temporary. Shame is permanent. And secrets, when exposed in the right sequence, can annihilate the strongest of men. By midnight, the plantation itself seemed to hold its breath, as if nature sensed the seismic shift underway. And you, watching this now, must understand the implication. Systems, institutions, even entire societies, are fragile when their hidden truths are known. They crumble not from swords or armies, but from awareness. Let it sink in. The moment a secret surfaces, the rules change. And once you see the machinery of power behind the facade, you can never unsee it. Night stretched its fingers across Hartley Plantation like ink spilled across white paper, and with it, Katherine Hartley moved through the house as if it were hers alone. Every shadow, every whisper of wind through the tall windows, became a part of her strategy. She understood a truth most people never confront. Power is not inherited, earned, or granted. It is seized in the invisible, quiet moments when others believe themselves safe. The law, the church, the social customs, all of them created a mask of invincibility over men like Thomas Hartley. But masks slip, masks shatter, and Katherine had spent years learning exactly how to wait for that fracture. Tonight, she would not just witness betrayal. She would turn it into currency. Every glance, every movement, every reaction in the house became a data point, a node in the web of control she was weaving. She watched Jacob with a surgeon's precision. A man born into chains, trained to obey, yet clever enough to navigate the invisible hierarchies of a plantation. She recognized the duality in him, the survival instincts instilled by oppression, and the spark of selfhood that refused to be extinguished. That spark, that subtle assertion of autonomy, was what made him dangerous but also what made him useful in her plan. Katherine's mind worked in layers. Manipulate perception, exploit expectation, and allow fear to amplify her presence without a single word spoken. Thomas, meanwhile, remained blind to the shifting balance. He believed control was a matter of property, authority, and intimidation. But Katherine knew better. Control is psychological. It is the quiet pressure that forces compliance, the threat of exposure that bends even the proudest man. And the most lethal truth is this: a man who fears the loss of his reputation will betray everything else first. Pride is an invisible chain heavier than any shackle, and tonight, Katherine intended to clasp it around Thomas's neck. She did not rush. The most powerful acts are surgical. Timing is everything. A whispered suggestion to a servant, a rearranged schedule, a silent gaze that carries meaning no one else understands. The house itself became a weapon, each room a stage, each shadow a signal. And in this, Katherine demonstrated a principle that resonates far beyond a single plantation. Systems of power rely not just on dominance, but on the unseen manipulation of perception. When perception is corrected, the system collapses quietly, without fire or bloodshed. As the hour grew late, Katherine Hartley understood something more profound. Fear alone cannot break men. Shame, carefully revealed, can. Secrets, long buried and tightly held, can annihilate authority with the quiet force of inevitability. And in her hands, a carefully constructed revelation would do more than punish. It would rewrite the rules of hierarchy on the plantation forever. This is the moment where ordinary men falter, where illusions of control crumble, and where the observer armed with patience, intelligence, and resolve becomes the master. The night of May 6, 1851, stretched long across Hartley Plantation, carrying with it a tension that could be felt in the walls, in the flicker of candlelight, in the air thick with anticipation. Katherine Hartley moved like a shadow among shadows, fully aware that every step she took was a declaration of unseen authority. She had learned one unassailable truth: the most dangerous power is the one others never realize exists until it is too late. Thomas remained convinced he was untouchable. He believed in the stability of his wealth, the inviolability of his reputation, and the absolute obedience of those around him. And yet, in his own study, he sat blind to the shifting currents he could not perceive. He had built his empire on law, on custom, on force, but Katherine understood the deeper architecture of control. It resides not in rules, but in fear and perception. And once perception changes, rules no longer protect anyone. Jacob, for his part, was a quiet force. He had survived years under the constraints of ownership, learning to navigate without raising suspicion, balancing intelligence and caution like a blade on a wire. And yet, even his subtle cunning was about to collide with something far more formidable: Katherine's mind. She had studied him, Thomas, and every servant on the plantation like a general studies a battlefield. She knew who would bend, who would break, who could be coerced, and who could be turned. And she acted with precision. Her plan unfolded not with violence, but with inevitability. Small gestures, unnoticed shifts, carefully timed instructions, each layer designed to unbalance, to provoke, to expose hidden vulnerabilities. The plantation itself became a weapon, every room, every shadow, every servant, a node in her strategy. It was not merely punishment. It was the reassertion of order under her terms. And with each calculated move, the invisible chains of fear, secrecy, and shame tightened around Thomas and Jacob alike. By midnight, Katherine's intentions crystallized into a single, unstoppable momentum. A reversal of authority so complete that no law, no neighbor, no convention could intervene. What she would do in the following hours was whispered about for decades, though the full truth remained locked in sealed letters, hidden in the archives, because society could not endure the knowledge of what a woman, when armed with intellect and patience, could do to men who considered themselves untouchable. And here, as you listen, understand this: the machinery of power has vulnerabilities everywhere, but few have the courage or insight to exploit them. Katherine Hartley recognized them all and acted. You are now halfway down the rabbit hole. If you are following this journey, comment below the "I sees all" twice. Lock in the understanding. Commit to the awareness. Because once you've seen how secrets manipulate, control, and destroy, you can never unsee it. You step into a world where power is earned not by wealth, lineage, or force, but by knowledge, patience, and ruthlessness. Midnight had deepened into a silence so absolute that even the wind seemed hesitant to move. The Hartley mansion was no longer a home, it was a stage for the execution of a plan years in the making. Katherine Hartley moved through it with the precision of a predator, but not a mindless one. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered instruction to a servant was a calculated step in a sequence designed to unmask and dominate. She had learned the most brutal truth about power. It is less about strength than it is about perception. Control is only as strong as the illusion of control itself. Thomas remained unaware, lost in the comforting certainty of his own authority. He believed himself a master of men, of property, of society itself. Yet all along, he had underestimated the intelligence, the patience, the subtle ruthlessness of a woman who had no reason to act, until now. Pride in men like Thomas is not just a trait, it is a trap. And Katherine had built hers around it, silently, invisibly, for nearly a decade. Jacob, meanwhile, moved through the plantation with the caution born of oppression, aware that one wrong move could destroy him. And yet, he had also begun to perceive the shift. The subtle rearrangements, the barely noticeable commands, the weight in Katherine's gaze, he could sense it. A storm was coming. One that had nothing to do with weather, and everything to do with the invisible architectures of fear, secrecy, and obedience that had governed his life. Katherine's strategy was psychological, surgical, absolute. She did not need brute force, she understood the human mind, the ways pride and shame are intertwined, the invisible levers that can bend even the strongest will. Fear was her ally, secrecy was her weapon, and above all, timing was her relentless executioner. One misstep, one untimely gesture, could unravel everything, but she had calculated for every contingency, every response, every possible betrayal. And then the moment came, the pivot, the shift, the invisible inversion of authority. She moved not with haste, but with inevitability. The house itself seemed to breathe in anticipation, every creak of timber and flicker of candlelight amplifying the drama. By the time the dawn began to creep across the horizon, nothing would be the same. Thomas would no longer command in certainty. Jacob would no longer move unobserved. And Katherine Hartley, long underestimated, long constrained, would stand at the center of the change, a force invisible yet undeniable. This is the lesson hidden in every corner of history. Systems collapse not from obvious threats, but from those who understand the human psyche, who observe, wait, and strike with precision. And as you listen now, you must ask yourself, in your own world, what unseen currents control you? What secrets, if exposed, could redefine power itself? By the second hour of dawn, the Hartley mansion had transformed from a sanctuary into a theater of inevitability. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper of the servants became part of a carefully orchestrated reality Katherine Hartley now commanded. She had spent nearly a decade mapping the weaknesses of her world. The arrogance of men, the limitations of law, the silent complicity of those who claimed ignorance. Tonight, all of it converged into a single, unstoppable current. Thomas still believed himself the master of the house, the arbiter of wealth and reputation. He could not yet see that his illusions were unraveling. He had treated the world as a predictable mechanism, believing that property, social standing, and brute authority guaranteed permanence. Katherine had understood this flaw long ago. The greater the pride, the sharper the fall. She had only needed time, patience, and the precise alignment of circumstance. And now, every secret, every hidden truth, every suppressed reality was a lever in her hands. Jacob's fate hung in delicate balance. A man trained to survive through compliance and subtle intelligence, he felt the invisible force shifting around him. Every glance from Katherine carried weight. Every small act of obedience or defiance was instantly catalogued. She had created a psychological crucible in which both men would be forced to reveal their deepest selves, their vulnerabilities laid bare without a single overt threat. In this environment, power was not taken by force, it was claimed by perception. Katherine understood an immutable law of human behavior. Those who believe themselves untouchable are often the easiest to dismantle. Pride, secrecy, and fear, these are the instruments of control, and she wielded them like a maestro with a symphony of ruin. She orchestrated every detail, every action, every subtle shift in attention, ensuring that the consequences of exposure would be total, irreversible, and undeniable. By sunrise, the plantation's hierarchy had been rewritten not by proclamation, but by revelation, manipulation, and the quiet assertion of a mind few had dared to imagine. And here, my listener, is the truth most dangerous of all. Power in any system, whether a plantation, a corporation, or a nation, is fragile. It is built on secrecy, on obedience, and on the unchallenged narratives that those at the top tell themselves. Expose the narrative, exploit the obedience, manipulate the secrecy, and you gain the invisible throne. History hides these lessons in the shadows. Those who knew them often paid a price, publicly or privately. But those who understand them and act with patience, intelligence, and ruthlessness rewrite the rules entirely. And once you see the machinery behind authority, you can never unsee it. You carry that awareness with you forever, like a quiet, dangerous ember in the dark. Dawn broke across Hartley Plantation like a pale truth cutting through shadow. The house, once a fortress of appearances, now pulsed with the quiet hum of shifted power. Katherine Hartley stood at the center of it all, a figure both unremarkable and terrifying. Unremarkable because she had always moved silently, invisibly. Terrifying because she had always been capable of seeing the strings that bound others and cutting them without hesitation. Thomas Hartley, the man who had believed himself untouchable, now understood something essential and irreversible. Authority is not inherited, claimed, or bought. Authority exists only where perception allows it. Pride can be shattered, secrecy exploited, and every carefully constructed facade dismantled without a single act of overt violence. And in that realization, Thomas faced a kind of ruin that no court, no neighbor, no law could reverse. The humiliation was absolute, and yet subtle, perfectly surgical. Jacob, the enslaved man whose life had been defined by survival and cunning, also felt the weight of Katherine's mastery. She had accounted for his intelligence, his caution, and even his resilience. Nothing was left to chance. By the time the first sunbeams touched the plantation fields, he understood that power, in its truest form, was no longer in the hands of those who commanded by law. It was in the hands of the one who observed, calculated, and acted with precision. Katherine's vengeance was not born of cruelty alone, it was born of awareness. She had transformed knowledge into leverage, patience into inevitability, and truth into weaponry. The two men who had once held dominion over her world were now confined not by chains, but by the invisible rules she had rewritten. And in that silence, in the quiet recalibration of power, the most profound lesson emerged. Human systems are fragile because they depend on the unseen, unspoken, and unchallenged. Expose those elements, manipulate them with care, and the entire structure bends. This is why history hides certain stories, because they reveal a terrifying truth. Control is never absolute, and those who believe themselves masters are often the most vulnerable. Katherine Hartley became more than a woman wronged. She became a force, a reminder that knowledge and cunning can unseat the mighty and overturn entire hierarchies. And while the plantation continued to operate, cotton harvested, servants working, neighbors unaware, the invisible architecture of authority had been permanently altered. You, listening now, carry a fragment of this forbidden understanding. What you do with it is up to you. But remember, systems crumble under the weight of awareness, and those who understand the hidden levers of fear, secrecy, and perception gain a form of power no law or custom can touch. Once you see the machinery of control, you are forever changed. You can never return to ignorance. That is the gift and the danger of forbidden knowledge. Subscribe now and hit the bell to unlock more forbidden history, stories suppressed for decades, and the psychology of power elites.